On January 17, 1991, a U.S.-led coalition launched a massive air war in response to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. Operation Desert Storm had begun. Laser and satellite-guided missiles dramatically reduced the risk of Allied casualties. It promised to be a clean, high-tech war. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein vowed to retaliate. He unleashed wave after wave of Scud missiles at cities in Israel and Saudi Arabia. Airstrikes proved useless against the Scuds. The missiles were mounted on mobile launchers and eluded aerial surveillance. The coalition would have to fight the Scuds the old-fashioned way, with men on the ground.
All right, lads, carry on, but listen up. This is the information.
A mission this dangerous required a high level of training. Team Bravo 20 of the British SAS was briefed at a forward operating base.
Efforts by the coalition air forces to suppress the Iraqi launches of Scud missiles against Israel and Saudi Arabia have been a failure thus far.
Formed in World War II, the SAS, or Special Air Service, is the most experienced special forces unit in the world.
Key portions of the targets, most notably...
The 8 men of Bravo 20 would be dropped behind enemy lines for 10 days.
...not identified before the 17th of January.
Their mission, to track mobile Scud launchers along a major supply route, or MSR.
Andy, can I have a word?
Sergeant Andy McNabb would lead the dangerous operation. He and his men were also ordered to destroy a fiber optic cable running alongside the MSR.
Fiber optic cables. Wait, follow.
It was a crucial target. The cable linked Scud missile launchers to Iraqi command and control.
The missiles?
To sever that link, they first had to find it. Andy McNabb's identity is protected for security reasons.
The problem was there was no information, very little mapping, and no satellite imagery of the area that we're going to operate in. You've just got to get out there. And the argument is, well, that's what special forces do. Sometimes they go in without any information whatsoever because they're there to gather it.
When you land, find a lie-up position with close proximity to the main supply route. You're going to have to dig into the sand to create your LUP.
The flat desert terrain would offer little cover. The squad would have to dig trenches or lie-up positions to hide in.
I want you to destroy as many Scuds as you possibly can.
Once we got on the ground, our biggest weapon would be concealment. We're not going to be moving in the daylight. What we're going to be doing is hiding up in a lie-up position, an LUP, in the daylight hours. During the night, we would then go out and operate.
If we haven't heard from you within 48 hours, make your way back to the rendezvous point right here, and we'll have a helicopter there ready to come and meet you.
The way that we operate is in small groups, maybe 4, 8, 12 men, going in for a surgical strike to hit a target and get in there quickly and come out even quicker.
Bravo 20 geared up and prepped the mission.
Everybody in that patrol, all 8 of us, get in, we start and plan and prepare the operation. Because of everybody's background being so different, teamwork is so important.
Hey Chris! Hey Chris! Ready for this?
At 24, Bob was the youngest member of the team. He had been in the SAS 6 months. Chris Ryan, a 6-year veteran, was the unit's medic. Mike joined the SAS from New Zealand.
You've got to move enough weight as it is, you know.
Stan, an Australian, was a demolition expert.
From a commander's point of view, you're getting a lot of different types of experiences. Everybody feels that they're part of the job.
Vince brought 20 years of experience to the team. Dinger had specialized training as a paratrooper.
You sure those are yours? Yeah. Write your name on them over there.
Steve Lane, known as Legs, was Bravo 20's communications expert. The team would use a short burst radio to stay in touch with headquarters in Saudi Arabia. This radio is designed to prevent enemy eavesdropping. As a backup, they also carried a TAC-B, a limited-range emergency radio. For navigation, they packed a global positioning satellite device, or GPS. On January 22nd, the SAS boarded a helicopter for the flight into Iraq. Chris Ryan had no illusions about the nature of the mission.
It was quite an emotional event because I think everybody had a fair idea that this was going to be a one-way ticket. So we said our farewells, got on board the helicopter, and then flew into Iraq. Looking out the windows, you could see quite far, and the ground was very flat. The ambient light was very good.
The helicopter raced 20 yards off the ground to avoid enemy radar.
The helicopter didn't have any armaments on. I mean, the crew were very brave. If we downed the aircraft, they were just to attach themselves to us, and we would bring them out. These lads hadn't been trained in escape and evasion or anything, so they were taking a huge risk. As soon as we got touchdown, the drill is you get off the back and just lie down and wait till the helicopter takes off, wait till the noise dies down, and you get your hearing back, your night vision, everything. So we got two of the guys with the guns, left and right, and then once we settled down, basically there was nothing around it, just still. We hadn't been compromised.
Andy used the GPS and a map to plot their position. The team had landed just over a mile from their destination, a major Iraqi supply route, or MSR.
Single file on me.
The commandos were heavily armed. They carried M16s outfitted with grenade launchers and powerful anti-tank weapons. Their belt kits were packed with enough ammunition to last them 2 weeks. The other essentials, food, water, and digging equipment, were carried in heavy burgans on their backs.
We were using an Allied bombing raid that was going on in an airfield about sort of 15 kilometers away as cover to get us in.
It's not a problem, Chris. Let's just get on with it, all right?
By 4:45 a.m., the patrol reached the main supply route. Instead of soft desert sand, they'd found solid rock.
Andy, come on, bedrock.
All you had was a couple of inches of sand, and then underneath was bedrock. It was a nightmare. But again, that's tough. You're there. You still got to get on with it.
Got you. Stand, Dinger, mark, on me.
Andy took a small group to scout for another hiding place.
I'd like to tell you what.
The others stayed behind to guard the gear. The recon team located a dry riverbed. It wouldn't provide much cover, but with dawn approaching, it was all they had.
This'll do. Let's go get the others.
The men hunkered down and tried to stay warm.
What was supposed to be to do?
Despite all the gear they carried, they were not prepared for bad weather.
It was the worst winter Iraq was having in 30 years. It was very, very cold. There was a high wind chill factor also.
At dawn, Bob scanned the perimeter for potential threats. The area was clear.
No problem, man.
Andy needed to contact SAS headquarters. Legs sent the message via short burst radio.
Anything? It's not going through. Something's wrong with the signal. It's not connected. It's not transmitting.
The radio wasn't working. In the rush to deploy, it had been encrypted with the wrong frequencies.
All right, boys, that's it. It's the radio. It's nothing to do with us. We'll do an exchange, all right?
Andy was unconcerned. The team had planned for contingencies. If they failed to establish communications within 48 hours, headquarters would send a helicopter to a pre-arranged rendezvous point.
The plan was that 4 o'clock that following morning, a helicopter would be there. So that was no problems. We're still going to be operating. We'll get a new radio and we'll carry on.
The communications breakdown was a nuisance, but the mission plan was intact. They had to find the fiber optic cable.
The problems that we had was that we didn't exactly know how it was marked. We didn't know if it was above ground in concrete piping or buried underground with markers. We didn't have a clue.
At nightfall, Andy led a small reconnaissance patrol to search for the cable. Along the way, they encountered an Iraqi anti-aircraft position. It was a tempting target.
But our job is not to go in there and take them on, is not to go in there and find out what they are. Our job is to find the optic cable. So anything animal or human, we avoid.
Let's box around.
They moved carefully around the Iraqis. Near dawn, the recon patrol found what they were looking for.
There were some white stakes that were stuck into the ground, which we assume might be the markers for the cable. But as the night got on, we were starting to get to first light again, so we had to get back into the hide before daylight.
It was too late to try to destroy the cable. It would return the following night. The next morning, the SAS had company.
About 400 meters away, the other side of the MSR, the main supply route, there was an anti-aircraft site. And what we presume, it was the guys we met the night before that have driven to their position. It didn't present a problem to us at that time, purely because we were hidden. They're not going to send out clearing patrols. They're so far in their own country. So there was no change to the plan.
They would wait out the day, hit the target that night, and then pick up the new radio.
We started to hear goats moving across the high ground, you know, just about 5 meters above us. Then after a few minutes, the head goat with a bill, you know, every other goat sort of follows, came over and looked over the dip on the ground and looked down at us. And then we could hear a small child's voice, you know, maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8, you know, I don't know. And it's then when he saw us, and we sort of stopped, we looked at him, he looked at us, and his sort of eyes opened up like saucers.
Want some chocolate?
And then straight away just started to run and shout, running towards the guns.
Their position had been compromised. The commandos prepared to move out. They removed all non-essential gear and loaded up on water.
Let's go.
They would have to move fast. If the Iraqi soldiers discovered them, it was prison, torture, or death. In early 1991, a US-led coalition launched Operation Desert Storm. 3 days later, an elite team of British SAS commandos infiltrated Iraq. Their mission, to disable the enemy's Scud missile system. But within 24 hours, the team's hiding place was compromised. A platoon of Iraqi soldiers was camped 200 yards away. The commandos had extensive training in escape and evasion. A dry riverbed, or wadi, provided an escape route. Chris Ryan, the team's medic, took the point.
And we kept to the left-hand side of the wadi whilst we're walking out in single file to keep out of view of the anti-aircraft positions. And what we'd done is we put our shamags over our faces to cover our faces, thinking that we could possibly bluff them. They were probably the last people to think that there was coalition forces this deep inside of Iraq.
Sergeant Andy McNabb was commander of the unit.
And then all of a sudden, to our left, coming from the area of the MSR, we heard tracked vehicles.
Hold! Stand your ground! Can anyone hear it? I can't see it!
What are we going to do? Are we going to keep on moving and outrun them? That's not going to happen. Or are we going to stand our ground? And the commander gave was stand your ground, because there's nothing else to do. And then it kicked off. Everybody's then in their own world. They know what they've got to do. They know that everybody's depending on everyone else. If you've got well-trained troops, they get on with it. The only way to get out of an ambush is face it and go for it.
The fire was coming in quite intense. And I can remember looking down at my chest, expecting to see a hole appear, or, a body part be taken off. At some point during the contact, we'd moved into view of the anti-aircraft positions, and then they started to open up on us.
After that, it was a matter of taking control. What we're doing is trying to stop these people from killing us so we can run away and use the cover of darkness to hide us. So it was literally moving as fast as we can out of the area.
The SAS decimated the entire Iraqi platoon with superior firepower. They were now fugitives in a hostile country.
We got over the high ground. I can't believe it, but there was the 8 members there. We were all there, nobody being injured. When we got across there, I was half expecting at least one of the lads to have been hit.
By nightfall, the team had covered 8 miles.
What about the radio, Lex? I had to drop it. It's not a problem. Gotta make the RV. That's it.
To make distance between us and the Iraqis after that firefight and the contact, we ditched our Bergens, our equipment. All we had left was our belt kit, and that, carries the most important things, which is ammunition and water.
Throughout the night, Iraqi patrols methodically searched the desert. Andy McNabb intended to throw them off course.
The fact that we've had this contact, the Iraqis will naturally think we're going south, we're going towards Saudi, and that's where the emergency RV was. So even if the helicopter did get in, will it be able to pick us up? If we're getting pursued south during the night, do we have to try to get extracted whilst having a firefight? If that happens, the helicopter won't come in. It's as simple as that.
A helicopter rescue was now impossible. It was too dangerous to land. The team's only hope was to escape into Syria. According to the map, the border was 110 miles northwest of their position. Andy estimated it would take them 3 nights on foot.
Once we realised we were in an escape and evasion situation, our mindset just changed, and we all accepted that we are now on the run. We were probably in the worst place in the world to escape. It was flatbed rock, there wasn't any cover, there was no foliage to disappear into, there was no water, and the ground was very hard to travel over and to navigate over as well.
30 miles into their journey, Andy noticed that Vince and Stan were falling behind.
Vince, what's wrong with the leg?
Vince had injured his leg during the firefight.
Chris, Dinger, take Vince's weapon.
He was too weak to carry his weapon.
Stan was starting to dehydrate. We stopped, we rested, got fluids down him, helped Vince and the leg injuries as much as possible. I put them in front of me, and then I put Chris out in front as the lead scout.
As the SAS headed north, they encountered a new threat, hypothermia.
During that night, the weather became horrendous, absolutely horrendous. There was a fearsome wind that was blowing and started to get extremely cold.
As the temperature dipped below zero, the men were in danger of freezing to death.
Our hands were starting to freeze up, and the shamags that we wore to cover us from the wind started to freeze up where our moisture was coming through with breathing.
Over the roar of the wind, Andy barely made out the sound of Allied aircraft overhead.
You gotta stop and try to attack me!
He told Vince to stop and to pass the message down the line. He wanted to use their emergency radio to contact a passing jet.
Well, any call sign? This is Bravo 2-0! Bravo 2-0! We are a ground call sign. Call that. We're in trouble. Over!
Okay, Bravo 2-0. You're very weak.
Turn back north! Turn back north!
And then
Over.
the signal faded. At that time it was great, because what it meant was that they were aware that this call sign Bravo 2-0, they could work out where we roughly were and that we existed, and we're in trouble.
Andy turned to tell Vince, but he was gone. Visibility was poor. They could see nothing but blowing sand.
Where've they gone? Where've they gone?
Chris, Stan, and Vince had vanished. 2 of them were injured. They would be lost without the GPS. As the temperature dipped below zero, Andy knew they had to be found, and quickly.
Chris!
During the Persian Gulf War, 8 members of the British SAS were trapped behind enemy lines. Pursued by Iraqi patrols, battling icy winds, the team struggled to make it to the Syrian border.
Gotta stop and try and attack me!
Sergeant Andy McNabb lost 3 of his men when he stopped to use the emergency radio.
The patrol had split in 2, and it was my fault. What I'd done, I told Vince that we were going to stop, expecting him to pass it on the line, so everybody knew what was going on.
Where've they gone?
But what they didn't appreciate was how bad a condition he was, and they didn't confirm that he was going to pass it on. He just carried on moving.
A search for the missing men proved futile. Visibility was extremely low. Andy couldn't risk the lives of the rest of the team.
The three guys that were split from us five, they knew the bearing that they were going on. They knew what the plan was to get to Syria. They're all professional soldiers. Two of them are injured, but they're still alive. They know what they got to do.
It took Chris Ryan nearly an hour to realize they had separated from the group. All three soldiers were delirious with hypothermia.
All I know, I turned round, I had Stan and I had Vince, and the rest of the patrol had disappeared.
Where's the rest of the patrol? I don't know. We lost them. They split off somewhere.
Chris, the medic, was now responsible for two injured soldiers.
I had a night sight which I could view where we come from, but couldn't see any of the guys, couldn't make out anybody. I was quite worried and frightened now because there's three of us with two weapons. The other group of five had a GPS and the machine guns.
Chris urged Vince and Stan on. The Euphrates River was 70 miles northwest, a 2-day hike. There they would refill their canteens and cross the border into Syria. But for now, they needed a place to hide.
Just before daybreak, we came across an old tank berm, and it made an indentation in the ground, which was like a little ditch. So we got in there and used that as cover. I had a look around as daylight came up, and I could see a box-bodied vehicle with at least two Iraqis around it.
All they could do was keep still and hope they were not discovered. The wind chill was severe. Chris and his men were in danger.
And I've worked in some of the coldest places on this earth, and that day was the longest day of my life. We were freezing. We were freezing to death.
Andy's group wasn't faring much better. A burial mound provided minimal cover. Iraqi troops were everywhere.
It was obvious there was far more enemy activity than we initially thought. And what was happening was that vehicles were stopping and troops were getting out. Now, whether they were looking for us or whether it was speculative searching, we don't really know. I personally was getting quite concerned because it was either the weather or the Iraqis were going to kill us. It was going to be one or the other.
Andy spotted a paved road a half-mile from their position. If they could make it that far without being seen, they could try to hijack a vehicle. At nightfall, they would sneak down to the road. But for now, they had to survive another day of sub-zero temperatures. Chris and his team left the tank berm as soon as it got dark. There was no let-up in the storm. Stan had recovered from serious dehydration. But Vince seemed to be getting worse.
You're gonna have to slow down! I need a rest! Vince, you can't rest! We've gotta keep moving!
The bitter wind kept their body temperatures dangerously low.
During that night, Vince kept falling behind. He went through all the classic signs of hypothermia, from being shouting, screaming, to wanting to lie down and sleep.
Chris knew they couldn't survive these conditions much longer.
Hey, we're coming off.
The men were already disoriented. It was a struggle to stay on course. Andy and his men reached the road. The storm had finally passed over them. After hours of waiting, they saw headlights in the distance. If they wanted to get out of Iraq alive, it was now or never. During Operation Desert Storm, 3 British SAS commandos were separated from their unit behind enemy lines. A winter storm hampered navigation. Hypothermia quickly set in. Vince, the most experienced of the 3 commandos, had been injured in a firefight. Now he struggled to keep up. By the time Chris and Stan realized their teammate was missing, it was too late. There was no sign of him. The situation was desperate. With Iraqi patrols closing in, Chris Ryan had a difficult decision to make.
We called off the search for Vince because we were walking back into enemy territory. Vince may have walked off to the left or right, and he could be wandering anywhere. I know in my heart of hearts that man probably laid down and went to sleep, and he died that night.
Chris and Stan had to go on. It was 54 miles to the Syrian border. Out of range of the storm, the rest of the unit staked out a road. Sergeant Andy McNabb and his men were in bad shape, but they had a plan. If they could hijack a vehicle, they could drive across the border.
So I got out on the road and start to wave the vehicle down as the headlights approached. What it was a 1960s New York taxi cab. I couldn't believe it.
Get down! Get down! What's in the problem? Get in! Get in!
The SAS drove northwest. They were now just 35 miles from the border. Not far away, Chris and Stan were in trouble. Both men were dehydrated and exhausted. An Iraqi shepherd approached their position. In desperation, Stan blew their cover.
How you doing, mate? How you doing, mate? Good.
The commandos needed a vehicle.
This lad couldn't speak English, and we couldn't speak any Arabic. And Stan was asking me, did he have a vehicle and or a tractor?
A tractor? How far to walk? How far to walk? He's just saying yes to everything. Listen, I'll take him and see if we can get a tractor.
Stan insisted on taking the shepherd in search of a vehicle.
I was against it because it was breaking SOPs. Stan left his weapon and webbing with me. And I said, I'll be leaving this location at 6:30. If you're not back, I'm going.
Hold on to it, Stan.
And I said, if you change your mind, just shoot this guy and come back.
By now, Andy and the rest of the team were approaching the border. With no Iraqi patrols in sight, it looked as if the carjacking had paid off. Chris's situation was grim. It was nearly dawn, and Stan had not returned. He needed a place to hide.
I looked over my shoulder, and there was a set of lights, and I thought, pray, he must have gotten a vehicle, and he was right, and I was wrong. And within a short period of time, there was a second set of lights.
Chris knew he was in trouble.
First vehicle came to within about probably no more than 100 meters. I moved forward and put a burst into each vehicle. And then just basically turned around and then started legging it back in the direction that I'd been. There was nothing came out of them. There was no returning fire, nothing.
Chris Ryan was now on his own. Sergeant Andy McNabb and his men were 7 miles from Syria and safety.
We had no definite sort of road system. So basically we were heading northwest. So as we drove along the road, if we came to a junction, whatever was going northwest or in that general direction, we'll take it and just keep on trying to get to that border. We eventually got within 11 kilometers of the border, where we got caught in a line of traffic for a vehicle checkpoint. Iraqi soldiers were moving down the line of trucks and oil tankers and vehicles. Eventually they would come to our taxi. And then we just started running, and we started running west to get out of the area and get towards the border. We, could almost taste the border.
Standing between the SAS and the border was the Euphrates River.
Once we get out of the confusion, stop, consolidate, so we can get over the border that night.
Exactly 10 k's to the border. Okay, Mark, Ricky, on me. Let's go.
Andy and Mark reconned the river, looking for the narrowest point.
Because we knew if we didn't cross it, we'd die. Far too much activity, far too much.
They discovered an Iraqi patrol on top of their position. At the sound of gunfire, the rest of the team scattered. Legs and Dinger ran out of ammunition. They decided to swim for it. Bob was forced into the open and gunned down. Legs and Dinger made it to the opposite bank of the Euphrates. The half-mile swim in freezing water nearly finished them both. Andy and Mark were now low on ammo themselves. They made a break for the tree line.
As we came over the lip and started to move forward, we was opened up on from about 5 meters away.
Andy's clip ran empty. Mark was hit. Now, Andy's only defense was the darkness.
I boxed around the position and then just carried on for the border.
On the opposite side of the river, Dinger dragged Legs Lane to an old farm shed. Legs was barely conscious. He could go no further. A few minutes later, several Iraqis approached the shed. Some of them carried AK-47s. There was only one thing Dinger could do to save them both. He tried to escape, drawing the Iraqis away from the shed. Despite Dinger's sacrifice, Legs was too far gone. He died later that night. Chris struggled to keep going.
I had still my M16 with 2 or 3 rounds and the ammunition. Basically, from that point, I was just legging it. I knew I needed to get some water. I hadn't drank in 2 days. And basically, the vast majority of that night was spent just heading towards the Euphrates.
Daylight forced Andy McNabb into hiding just 1.5 miles from the Syrian border.
So I got under a drainage culvert, which was basically a ditch with a 1/2-inch steel plate across it, which made a bridge. And all day there were vehicles moving over.
Last night's firefight had the Iraqis scouring the desert for miles around. They searched every possible hiding place.
And you could see boots come down and rifles poking in the culvert. 2 guys dragged me out, and they dragged me out. I was on my back. As I looked, I could see the high ground of Syria, which I couldn't see because obviously I found the hiding place at the last light, so I didn't see it. So it was so close I could always taste it.
Andy was taken to a military camp near Baghdad. Iraqi intelligence had learned that over the last 5 days, British commandos had killed 250 of their soldiers. Now they wanted revenge. Andy knew the Iraqis would stop at nothing to uncover the SAS mission. Sergeant Andy McNabb of the British SAS had been captured behind enemy lines. He was taken to a military camp deep inside Iraq. He learned that 2 other members of his squad were also there. Stan had been caught trying to commandeer a vehicle. Dinger had risked capture to save his teammate, Legs Lane. Now, all 3 commandos faced torture by Iraqi interrogators.
During the time in the interrogation center, certainly after the first 4 or 5 days, I thought there's no way we're going to get out of this, we're dead.
We're all soldiers here.
His training had prepared him for physical and psychological torture.
You've got to accept what's ever happened to you physically. What you're trying to do is be the grey man, not be any obstruction, not try and be aggressive. You know, you're just trying to go with the flow and keep that mental integrity.
We're not making much progress, Andy.
Andy finally offered interrogators a cover story. They were medics, separated from their unit. The Iraqis weren't satisfied. Chris Ryan was the only member of the team who had not been killed or captured. U.S. fighter jets were bombing a military installation near his position. The young medic was running out of time.
At this point, I knew I was in trouble the way my body was. I mean, I've smelled dead bodies before, and I've been on exercise where I haven't washed for 3 months, and your body gives a particular smell. Now, when I squeezed my fingernails, there was pus coming out of them. As I said, all my teeth were loose now. There was bleeding. My feet were in a dreadful state. The sores were open on my body. I was quite worried. I didn't know how far I could actually go on.
Syria.
At dawn, Chris approached a small farm.
Syria. This is Syria.
Chris Ryan had achieved the impossible. Without food or clean water, he walked 180 miles in 7 nights to reach the safety of Syria. At the same time, 3 of his teammates were being held in a prison near Baghdad. Their situation was grim.
God,
The cells were filthy and freezing.
I want to speak to officer.
The beatings came more often.
I want to speak to officer.
After 8 days of torture, Andy decided his men had held out long enough.
I'm a member of a close observation platoon.
Andy told the officer a modified version of the truth. They already knew much of the information he gave them, and this helped verify his story.
Myself, Dinger, and Stan were put into the same cell. For me, it was fantastic. It was good as we had time to sort of debrief and try and work out what had happened.
In late January, Saddam Hussein revealed he was using US and British POWs as human shields. He hoped to protect his military installations against air attacks. The US-led coalition countered with the most intense ground war since Vietnam. In 2 short days, coalition troops demolished what was left of Hussein's army. The Iraqi dictator quickly conceded defeat. On February 26, 1991, he agreed to withdraw his troops from Kuwait completely. The coalition demanded the freedom of all POWs. The imprisoned SAS commandos were released 10 days later. At the Red Cross station in Baghdad, Andy was surprised to find Mark alive. He had only been wounded in the firefight. Five members of the team survived. 3 did not. Bob Consiglio, Vince Phillips, and Legs Lane were killed in action. The men of Bravo 2-0 risked everything to accomplish their mission. Their courage and their sacrifice will never be forgotten.